Hello learners, welcome to this another session of Certificate in Fashion Design program. Today we are here to discuss the Unit 7 of Block 2 of Course 2, which is BFDI 072, Basics of Pattern Making and Sewing. Points we will be discussing in this particular session. So in this session we will be discussing about the term pressing and why it is done in garment construction, what is it, the importance of pressing in garment construction, what all steps we follow for the pressing process, and its types, how many types of pressing process we do in the garment construction. Next we will discuss about the reducing seam bulks, how we will reduce the seam bulks when we are going to construct a garment and its process. Third topic we will be discussing is the special seam situations, and lastly we will discuss about the darts, its different types and its use in garment construction. So let's see why this unit is important and what all information you will be having gain after going through this unit. After going through this unit, you will be able to differentiate between the pressing and ironing process and understand the importance of pressing in garment manufacture. Then you can analyze the pressing in relation to fabric and learn the right process, pressing techniques which we do for different types of fabrics. Then you can understand the significance and uses of slashes and notches in curved seam, which is very important when we do this stitching at the curved part of the garment. So you can understand the significance, why we do the slashing and notches in the curved seam spaces. You can understand the application of dart in garment manufacture, why dart is very important in the garment manufacture, and every type of garment we use different types of darts. And lastly, you can follow the right construction techniques. In this unit we have discussed all the techniques and the construction method, how you will develop the darts and the seam and the pressing process. Just let's start with the topic, and first we will discuss about the pressing. What do you mean by pressing? It is done at every stage of construction of a garment, and it helps to smooth and shape the garment. So when we are doing or constructing a garment, it is very important that the fabric what we are using before the construction of garment and when the garment is ready, it should be in a smooth structure, or there should not be any wrinkles or any crease. So it is done at every stage of construction of garment, and it helps to smooth and shape the garment. We can do the pressing by like heat, steam and pressure are the elements involved in the pressing. Like in ironing what we do, it is just from the heat process. But when we talk about the pressing technique, it all involves like heat technique. We can use do the pressing with the steam or any type of pressure we can use to do the pressing. Then steam and heat soften the fabric and make it more pliable, and pressure and heat set the fabric to the required shape. Like when we use the heat or steam, it makes the fabric more pliable, and when we use the heat process, it makes the fabric settle down at its required shape what we need. For example, a crease line is in a trouser, pleat line, etc. are pressed during the process of garment manufacturing. So this is how we do the pressing process. Then what is the main purpose of doing the pressing in garment? So pressing has a very important role to play in the process of garment manufacture. It serves the following functions, like it removes the crease from the garment or before the garment construction process, we do the pressing on the fabric to remove the crease or any wrinkles. When we get the fabric from the market, it had lots of crease and wrinkles. So to remove that all and get it in a better shape for cutting the garment fabric, we use the pressing process. It is also used to set the shape of the garment. Like when the garment is constructed after stitching, it has lot to set it in a proper shape. We do the pressing process. Then to shrink away the fullness, if the fullness is there in the garment or in the fabric, to remove that we use this technique. To give us neat, smooth and clean appearance, it is also used. And without pressing, the garment looks unfinished. So you can imagine if you have constructed a garment and it is just without stitching at, like if you go at a tailor's place to get a garment stitched for you, and you get a garment which is not ironed or which is not pressed properly or finished, so it doesn't look appealing or it doesn't look good. So without pressing, the garment looks unfinished, untidy and unattractive. So this is the main purpose or the importance of the pressing in the garment construction. Then there are different types of pressing process we follow in the garment construction. We can done in two stage of the garment manufacturing. Like during the process of garment manufacture, when it is done, it is called as the under pressing, and after garment has been constructed, when it is done, it is called as top pressing. So these two stages we generally do the pressing process at the during the garment construction. So first what we discussed is the under pressing. So under pressing, it is the pressing operation carried out during the garment making process. Like when we are making the garment, we do the at that time the process pressing, what we do, it is said as the under pressing, like what we do on the fabric before cutting of the garment. So it is the pressing at any part or section of garment in the intermediate stage of garment making, like during the making of the collars, scarves, seams, darts, pockets, at every time. Like if we have got the fabric, we can do the pressing at the fabric before cutting. When we have cut the fabric, we can do the pressing. Like if we want to set a collar on a garment, we do the pressing at that particular part of the garment. Then if we want to create some different type of seams, we do the pressing of that particular seam. So in this way we can do the pressing, under pressing on making of the collars, scarves, seams, darts, pockets, etc. So this is how we do the under pressing. Then we have the why it is used and what is its importance in the garment construction. Like in under pressing is easier as the garment parts are flat, because once the garment is stitched, every part like sleeve we have attached, every part what we have cut to get the garment stitched and we have attached, so it becomes little difficult to get it in a proper shape or to get it more pressed in a perfect manner. So under pressing is easier as the garment part are flat, like the collars we had talked about, the pockets we talked about, so all are in the flat manner, so we can do the pressing process easily. Then certain parts or the seams may not be accessible when the garment is finished, so it is important to press them during the process of construction, and subsequent tasks become easier and more accurate. Garment parts that have been under pressed can be handled more easily. Like if we have different parts separately, when it is not combined together, it is more easily to be pressed and make it in a proper shape. It helps to minimize the pressing, because if the whole garment we have to do, we have to follow some different types or the different method to do the pressing, and gives neat finish to the garment. The finish, the garment what we have in the as a final product, we get a good finish when we do the under pressing of the particular parts of the garment. So this was the main importance or the important role of under pressing in the garment construction, we can say. Then we have the top pressing stage. So top pressing stage, we can also say it as a finer pressing or a off pressing. So it is the pressing operation carried out after the garment has been made, as we discussed. In the under process we do at the cutting or the like first stage when we have the fabric. But top pressing is the operation carried out after the garment has been made, and it refers to the pressing of the finished garment just prior to packing. Like what we have constructed and we want to pack it, we do the pressing just before that. If the garment has been under pressed, finer pressing is simplified. Like if we have done the pressing of every part like the pocket, sleeve or seams anytime, we if we do the under top pressing, it becomes more easily and we have the good finished product. And large size pressing equipment and the large amount of steam is used for this purpose to do the pressing. So this was about the top pressing and under pressing. So ironing is just sliding or moving a heated iron and from over the material. Like when it is wrinkled, we just move a heated iron and wrinkles or the crease removes from the garment, and to smoothen out its surface. This may lead to stretching of the fabric as you slide the iron. Like when we do the ironing process, at some amount our fabric what we are ironing, it stretches, and this is how we do the ironing process. But pressing is applying pressure onto the material with a hot iron by keeping the iron at a particular one place. So in this pressing process, we do not move the iron or the any pressure what we are applying to the fabric or the garment at any stage. We just put the pressure on a particular place of the fabric or the garment. So removing it and placing it on another part of the material rather than sliding at on the fabric or from the fabric. So this is the basic difference what is between the ironing and the pressing process we follow in the garment construction. How the pressing in related to different types of fabric we generally use for the garment construction. So we know that there are different types of fabric we use, from the natural fabric to the synthetic fabric, from lightweight fabric to the heavyweight fabric. So how the pressing is related to the fabrics. So just see that in some categories of the fabric. First we will talk about the cotton and linen. So cotton and linen, as it is we know it is a natural fiber, and the fabric is generally we use in our garment construction. So these are fairly easy to press and in comparison to other, and they require a hot iron. So we can relate that we all have used iron, so we generally need a more temperature or more heat than any other fabric for the cotton and linen. So moisture and the pressure can be used to do the pressing. If using a steam iron, or if the fabric has a glaze finish to make it more shining, these fabric can be pressed on the right side. Otherwise we can use the pressure on the wrong side of the fabric, avoid the scouring. So this is how we do the pressing on the linen and the cotton fabric. So linen tends to shrink if too much moisture is used. Like when we use too much of moisture or steam iron, it shrinks. So but moisture must be used in order to remove the crease. So this is how we do the pressing for the cotton and linen fabric. Then we have the silk. How we do the pressing for the silk? It is a fine quality and it can be very difficult to press, because it is very delicate fabric, and if we use a little the temperature what is required, and if it is little bit more, it can get damaged. So it is very difficult to press. There is a tendency for silk to cling, and they are reluctant to lie flat. Then we can use only a light pressure or a moderate hot iron. Moisture is rarely used because of the possibility of the watermarks. Like if we use the steam or any moisture more than it is required, we can have a spots or a watermarks on the fabrics. That's why we generally used the moderate hot iron or a light pressure, or rarely we use the moisture or steam for the pressing of this silk fabric. Then we for the synthetic fabrics, so these require a cool iron as too much heat will melt the fabric, and we can use a little or no moisture to avoid the risk of watermarking, as it is made up of like any chemicals we made this synthetic fiber, so it may get watermarks very easily. And use medium pressure to prevent dart or seam impression. If we use any more than pressure what it required, it may have the uh, mark or the pressure of any dart or the seam on the other fabric what we are using. So it is difficult to remove the crease from this type of fabric, so we generally use the medium pressure, so that the pressure or the impression of another seam or dart what it is in the garment, it does not comes on the plain side of. We have the lightweight woolens. So pressure these with the moderately hot iron, steam and the pressure, we can care must be taken to avoid overuse of pressure, as this can cause impression on the right side of the garment, and this fabric will score easily and tends to shrink if steam is not used. So steam can also be used to shrink the area of the garment to fit the shape of the body. The pile fabric. So pile fabric is generally what is generally we use for the towels and all. So it is called the pile fabric, and pressing must be carried out on the wrong side of the fabric generally, because it can damage the right side. So this type of fabric must be pressed on special equipment called the needle board and prevent the flattening of the pile. Now we will talk about the reducing seam bulk, how we will reduce the seam bulk from the garment when we are going to construct it. So seam allowance means we have certain amount of allowance or the margin in the cutting area, distance between the cutting area and the stitching line of a garment. So sometimes the margin or the allowance which we give on the garment while we are constructing it, it becomes little bulky at a certain point. So to reduce that bulk from that particular seam allowance, we have certain techniques how we can remove that. And first it is done said as the trimming. So this means the cutting off some of the seam allowance which we have provided on the garment or the pattern. So if it interferes the construction step what we have to follow, we reduce that seam bulk, or we say at a seam bulk, and the process what we follow, it is said as the trimming. In that process, first what we technique what we follow is the slashing or clipping. So slashing or clipping, it is a slit or a cut which we make on the seam allowance. Like if we have given a suppose 1.5 inch or 1 inch of seam allowance between the stitching line and the cutting line, so that seam allowance is making some interference in what if we are constructing the garment. So we can do some clipping or notching, slashing or clipping process or technique, which is said as the how we can do it. We make a small slit or a cut on that allowance of inward curve seam. Like if we are making attaching a sleeve or to the armhole, and it is lots of seam bulk we are facing at that point, we can make a small slit so that it becomes very easy to construct or to attach the sleeve. So using the point of a scissor, we can make a cut at a perpendicular to the edge of a seam allowance, and it will remove the bulk from that particular area. Then we can also use the technique which is said as the notching. So notching we have already discussed, and notches, it's like a V-shaped cut what we make on the patterns. We can also use at a symbol to from where we can join the fabric, or notches are a small V-shaped piece of fabric what we cut, that get cut from the seam allowance on the outward curves to reduce the amount of fabric so as to give a flat edge when the seam is pressed and open. So this is the two method what we can use to reduce the seam bulk from the seam allowance part on the pattern. Facial seam situations which we follow, which we have in the garment construction, and it should be followed very wisely when we are constructing a garment, and we should know how we can analyze and how we can use in the garment construction. So some special seam techniques what we situations what we face or what we have in the garment construction is, first is the stitching bias, curved gathers, and intersecting or the corner seams. Like first is the bias seam. So bias we have already discussed in the unit another unit, that bias is a type of grain or a which we have on the fabric. So we have the lengthwise grain, crosswise grain, and the bias grain. So bias grain means when we cut the fabric on the 45-degree of angle, and at that particular point the fabric is more in its stretchable part. In the garment construction we follow some techniques in which we use the bias seam. So when stitching two bias edges, we can keep the fabric tight without stretching. If we stretch, it becomes more stretchable and our garment construction will not be perfect, so that the seam doesn't puckers. And when joining a bias edges to a straight edge, what we can do, we can stitch with a bias side on the top to prevent the stitching and puckering. So this is how we can reduce or how we can control a special seam situation, which is when we are stitching a bias fabric or bias strips, we can use this process. Curved seam situation. So curved seam situation, we can stitch a smooth curved seam, like if we have the armhole section or the neckline, and to achieve the same even distance from the edge, use slower machine speed and reduce the stitch length. What we can do when we are stitching the curved part of the garment, we can slower down the machine speed, and the stitch length, what we can do, we can reduce the length of the stitch as we are doing for the other part. So if both the curved in the same direction, slash and notch seam allowance is required, and after stitching the seam, so that the fabric will be very flat and it will look perfect. Then we have the gathered seam, like when we are making the gathers on the fabric at the design garment, what we should do, gathered fabric to a flat fabric we are attaching, so that what we can do, we can add the gathered fabric should always be on the top, so that when you are doing the stitching, you should have a look, or you should have a eyes that whether it is going correct or not. So always prefer to have the gathered fabric and the upside and the lower plain fabric, flat fabric on the lower side. Then the corner seam, like when we are stitching a garment, at some point we have to stitch a corner of the fabric or corner of the garment. Then to strengthen the corner, reduce the stitch length for a short distance and on each side of the corner, like on both the side of the corner, so that the small stitches are used to strengthen a corner or a point at this act, and it can be better finished corner. Then last, what the important thing in the garment construction we have is the darts. So dart is one of the most important technique what we use in the garment construction, because to give it a good shape of the to the garment, because our body what we are making the garment, it is not flat, it has some curves and the shape. So to give a proper shape to the garment, we use the dart, and also to reduce the bulk or the excess fabric from the garment, we use the dart. So there are two types of dart we generally use in the garment construction. First is the single pointed dart, and second is the double pointed dart. So single pointed dart, what we use is generally in every type of garment we use. It can be the waist dart, it can be the side seam dart, or the bust dart, or neck dart. We also call this single pointed dart as a plain dart. So it is used at the bust, the shoulder, waist, etc. So it is in the triangle shape on the garment, what you can see, and it is stitched to make it a good center fold line, and it has two stitches. So the two lines on either side of the center line that forms an open space at the pattern edge are called the dart legs. Like when you see on the garment, it is a triangle shape or line on a garment. It has two legs, two point from where the dart is stitched, and that two point is set as the dart leg on the garment. So the distance or space between these two lines at the base, it is called as the dart intake, like how much distance or what is the amount or what is the uh, intake of the dart is. So this is how we construct the single pointed dart. Then we have another type of dart we use in the garment is the double pointed, or we said it as a fish dart. So fish dart, this is the long dart with two ends on the garment. First one was with the one end on the garment, and this is with the two ends on the garment. It is a long single dart that fits at the waistline and the taper to the other opposite direction. So generally we use this fish dart or double pointed dart on single, like one piece garment, which is in which the upper bodies and the skirt or the lower is attached together. So it takes care of the fit of the lower garment as well as the upper garment. So we do not have to make another two different types of dart. We just make this one to give a good fit to the garment. So this was the basic information about this unit 7 of this particular course. So in this session we discussed about the pressing, which is as an essential element in the production of a perfectly finished garment. And for a good pressing techniques are very important to know as you are going to make a good sewing skills you can develop by using this process, pressing process. We explained the process of reducing seam bulks, how you will reduce seam bulk from the seam allowance part or from when you are constructing a garment, and special seam situations in the garment constructions, like if we are stitching the curve part of the garment, or we are using the bias seam, or we are using stitching the corner, how you will use different techniques to make it a perfect seam or a perfect garment. And lastly we discussed about the darts, its types and its use in the garment construction, why we use different types of dart in the garment construction. So this was the basic information about the unit 7. Hope this session is beneficial for you. Thank you.